All righty. So I am Robin Schwartz. I am the Program and Grant Director of the Community Arts Partnership. Welcome to the Zoom event part of the Spring Rights Literary Festival. There are two more Zoom events today. The 4 o'clock one is Ithaca College students. They're seniors. It's their last few days at Ithaca College, and I encourage any of you who aren't registered for that one to go to it because they're so excited and so happy, and I want to support them. After that, there's a group reading, and then there's one on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and more on Saturday. You've all been to the Spring Rights website. Oh, and then we have workshops going through August. So there's a lot. So if anyone doesn't know about the Community Arts Partnership, we're in Ithaca, New York, and our organization serves Tompkins County. Spring Rights is one of our annual programs, which includes the Greater Ithaca Art Trail. There's an artist market. We have a gallery, a Capapalooza art sale. We have grant programs for Tompkins County artists and not-for-profits. And this year alone, we've distributed $575,000 of state, county, and foundation money. And since '93, that number has been 6.5 million. So that is how awesome we are. Before we jump into tonight's event, please stay on mute throughout the event, unless you're talking, of course. And feel free to use the chat feature heavily. I will be monitoring it the whole time. And if in case anyone has questions, hey, are you guys going to do like a Q&A after you talk? Yeah, okay. So after the Q&A, we can all come off mute and just ask some questions. Your bathrooms are down the hall. Leave any time. We are recording this session. And I need to thank our amazing Spring Rights sponsors. Because of them, Spring Rights had a total of 40 events, and we can pay over 100 participating artists. So that's amazing. So our wonderful sponsors are Ithaca College, Wegmans, M&T Bank, CFCU Community Credit Union, the Odyssey Bookstore, and the Ithaca Marriott. We receive grant support from Poets and Writers and the Tompkins County Tourism Program. And our media sponsors are The Root, WITH Radio, WSKG, and Cinemapolis. And now I am going to turn the microphone over to Judith Pratt.
Hi, everybody. We are the Cayuga Writers. Today we'll each read a before and after piece of writing and talk about what it was before we all discussed the work and how we changed our work based on that. And that will vary. Each person has a slightly different approach, but that's generally what we'll do. We meet every other Saturday afternoon on Zoom. On the Monday before that, our moderator, Felicia Ansty, emails a reminder. And if we have writing to bring to the group, we send it out by that Wednesday. So that gives us time to put our changes and ideas on each piece of writing. And then Felicia says, okay, here's the list. During the meeting, as each participant's work comes up for discussion, every other member provides their feedback. And everyone has a turn to comment with minimal interruption. But the good thing is, because we're a smallish group, there's 6 of us, one of us couldn't be here today, the writer can ask questions, and we often get into really interesting discussions about how best a writer can improve the work. Oh, needless to say, we don't critique subject matter. Each of us writes about different topics and in different styles. And of course, for those of you who haven't been in a writer's group, you take responsibility for your comments. You don't say, well, the dialogue in this section reads a little boringly. Instead, we say, well, your dialogue is a little stiff in this section, I think. And we make sure we praise the things we like. After the meeting, we each send out our documents with our comments on track changes, for those of you who know about it, to the group. So today, we will each read a before and after version and talk about how that happens. I'll begin. I began as a playwright. Then I had an idea that wouldn't fit on a stage, so I wrote a novel, The Dry Country, which is behind me. And then I wrote Sylgia Magic, which is about to be on Amazon. The Dry Country is. I also write short stories and a few essays, which have appeared online and in print. I'm working on a third novel, which the writing group has been very helpful with. And the group has particularly helped me create more vivid images because I began as a playwright and we have set designers for that. I also appreciate the way they discover plot holes and even misplaced commas. Thanks. So I'll read the first part of my story called Knots and Tangles, and I'll read both the original and the rewrite. So, fluffing it all out, there we go. The first paragraph was, the knot grew slowly. He didn't know it was there, but he fought against it anyway. He fought other boys. He always got himself into trouble. And people said, that needs more clarity. What are you talking about? So I rewrote it as, the knots grew slowly. He didn't know they were there, but he fought against them anyway. By fighting his mother, his father, and other boys, he always got himself into trouble. So then it goes on. His family didn't like the knots. You're too difficult, they said. We fed you, we clothed you, you're grown, we're done with you now. His knots grew larger. He fought them by making things. Wood covered in Celtic knots, designs of knotted rope, drawings with no knots at all. He found a beautiful woman, they fell in love. And then the next paragraph had a lot of changes, so I will read you the original and the improved version. But her head was full of tangles. She had inherited them from her grandmother's grandmother and her grandmother and her mother. Her mother couldn't even see her children, she could only see herself. And everybody said, grandmothers, 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 what? So I improved it. But her head was full of tangles. She had inherited them from her mother and her grandmother and her grandmother's mother. Her own mother couldn't see her children. She couldn't see anyone, only herself. So there's more of this, another page and a half, but that's the help that I got with that one. And I've gotten help with a lot of other things, so thank you. So next up is our moderator and fellow scriptwriter, Felicia Ansty. Felicia.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Felicia Ansty, like Judith just said, and I'm a screenwriter. I've completed more than 30 screenplays, mostly in fantasy genre, but I've expanded out into some of the other ones as well. I've written, shorts, features, TV pilots, adaptations, and specs for existing television shows. I've had two things produced. One was a pilot for a potential, a trailer for potential pilot for a television pilot. Anyway, a trailer for a potential television pilot that never got actually filmed and produced, and also an animated short. Today I'll present the first half page or so of one of my fantasy pilots. It's called There's a Spell for That, and talk about the changes that the other members of the group put in a brainstorming session. We have enough time to allow these kinds of sessions where everybody can get together. There's a question. I've had problems with the beginning of this one, and so we set aside some time, and people were looking at the rest of the script, and then we discussed how it could possibly be improved based on the other information in the script to create a much more exciting and introductory paragraph, basically. So here is the first paragraph of There's a Spell for That. And I'll also paraphrase some of the screenwriting jargon that shows up as you write a particular script on a page. So the first thing that shows up is a computer screen. And there are words scrolling across it. You don't see anything else but the computer screen. So on the computer, the heading is Craigslist. To New York, to services offered. Ads fill the screen. Scroll without end. From Reiki healing to boat movers to ... The scroll pauses at various ads for tutors. And then there's a voice that comes off screen that you don't see. You still see the computer screen only, but you hear this voice. Biology tutor, no. Violin tutor, no. Oh, come on, herpetology tutor. Ha, don't need that one, I use protection. The scroll zips on, ad after ad after ad. Hey, wait, it backs up and stops on free spell. Got a problem? There's a spell for that. First one is free. And then the scene changes to Pam's room. Pam is the guest individual for this particular episode. Extravagant chic in silver and white. Every electronic gizmo and pop culture necessity money can buy. 0 bookcases. Pam Intman, 20, major hottie, popular cheerleading type, ogles the screen. She licks her lips. An easy fix? And then Pam says to herself, nah, there's no such thing as magic. So the problems I received basically in the comments on this beginning is that it is not a very exciting beginning. It doesn't draw anyone in. I mean, you've just got this computer screen right there. There's some words going across it, but it doesn't tell you anything about the main character. Pam is the guest character. It doesn't tell you greatly that there is a lot of magic involved directly. There's a mention of the spell, but that's it. It's not a very exciting thing. So we brainstormed for a while and came up with a new introduction. So here's the way it was changed. You still have the close on computer screen at the beginning, or I mean, not a computer screen, I'm sorry, close on, different image. An enormous blue eye behind shimmery fluid. It squints. Then the scene changes to interior chemistry lab. Lily Johnson, 18, shifts back from the beaker Bunsen burner combo she'd been studying. She frowns at the stubborn fluid, then taps a well-gnawed pencil on a parchment in capital letters with archaic lettering in capital letters and magical symbols in capital letters. She reads. Her face brightens. She uncorks a vial and tosses a pinch of green powder into the beaker. No reaction. Lily dumps in the entire contents and ratchets up the flame. Roiling incandescent colors. Aha, Lily grins. As Lily cranks the Bunsen burner flame even higher, footsteps clatter in the hall outside the lab. Suddenly, a blinding purple light shoots ceilingward from the beaker. Startled, Lily jumps back, trips, and as the lab door starts to swing in, revealing Cassie, Lily's best friend, Cassie says, "Hey, Lil, you in here?" Lily plops onto her butt on the floor. The purple light smashes into the ceiling and erupts into a shower of sparkles. So here we get a whole different beginning image, which is hopefully more enticing to a reader that will get them drawn into. You've got this enormous blue eye. Then you've got an image of Lily, who's our major character in the entire series. She is doing magical things here in this chemistry lab. And there's this issue with it erupting into the sky and bouncing off and creating all these purple sparks. So it's a very imagery intense beginning, and hopefully that will get readers and producers more interested in continuing past the first page and going on through the rest of the script. So that is what I had for mine. I really appreciate all the comments that the writing group gave me on that, and I think made it a much better introduction. So the next person up is Barbara Schramm.
You're muted.
Barbara Schramm, and I'm a nonfiction writer and published in several magazines. I've written stories about rehabilitation of wild animals and with domestic animals that had behavioral issues. I was a mind-body health care practitioner for over 35 years and a hospice nurse, so I've worked with people from birth to death and a little beyond. Some stories are written by a spiritual perspective. Some of my stories are about how natural remedies help people and help animals maintain or regain wellness. 5 years ago, given a year and a half to live, I began writing my journey, a collection of short stories. So I'll give you quickly 3 examples. And the first is about an animal, Susie, a raccoon. In the suggestion that I got, so I'm going to give you first the story from my point of view. Susie's story began one afternoon when officially marked state car parked in front of my house. My first thought was that my husband, something terrible had happened to him. My heart beat when I heard an urgent rap on our front door. The upper half was glass. There stood an environmental conservation officer with a Smokey the Bear hat clamped squarely on his head. He was wearing a dark green uniform and had a gun at his hip. He looked grim. As I opened the door, the officer thrust 5 pink, furless babies with their eyes still closed into my hands. The officer explained that a neighbor nearby had started a fire in their living room, which filled with smoke, and then they'd seen the ringtail of a mama raccoon as she fled. People called the officer, and one was standing by my door with babies in hand. I heard my sons, Bill and Bob, ages 4 and 6, clamber down the stairs. They stood wide-eyed behind me. The officers said that he had rescued the babies and brought them to us because he knew we could help. At the time, I had more compassion than wildlife rehabilitation skills. Care for the babies would require a sharp learning curve. Preparing them for survival on their own would be time consuming. That spring, we already had 6 ducks. Some were babies and some recovering from fish hooks on their feet. Louie the fish girl. And as much as I tried to remain in my role as rehabilitator, Susie wove her way into my heart. So I'd like to go a little bit further in this story because one of the questions was, what point of view do you want to work with? Who is your audience? And that can change dramatically by point of view. When we looked out this is my 6-year-old son, Bill. When we looked out our window and saw the green marked car, we ran down the stairs excited to see what the officer had brought. Mom showed us the 5 pink babies with closed eyes. At first, I couldn't tell what kind of animals they were. And as soon as the officer left, I helped my mom and brother make a nest for them out of a box lined with shredded newspaper. We kept the box in the laundry room where it's warm and changed the paper daily. That was not fun. Each day we fed the babies milk, lamb starter, from a baby doll bottle. My mom showed us how to stroke the babies' bellies and make them pee without getting peed on. We always took them outside for that. Mom told us about imprinting, so we knew when the babies opened their eyes, we'd be mom. That means being responsible. Seemed like a long time before their fur came in and their cute masked faces appeared. When they were old enough, we put a bowl of water beside their food and showed them how to dip grapes they loved into the water and wash them. And soon they dipped the grapes in the water and they just hand over hand washed them. The officer had told my mom and us that the babies probably wouldn't survive, but 3 did. We released 2 of those, and the 3rd was named Susie. We weren't supposed to name animals because the animals could not be pets, but Susie was. When she was little, I carried her to school in my pocket. My mom didn't know that until a teacher sent a note home saying, "Don't bring that raccoon to school again." When Susie was grown, there was a boy in school who was bullying me, and I told him I was going to bring my raccoon to school. I carried her there, and the bully never bothered me again. One of Susie's favorite things was to ride in my bicycle basket with her paws over the front handlebars. I take her to 7-Eleven for a special treat, bit of honey candy bar. I'm just going to skip a little bit and just say this story I gave more fully, but the feedback was to listen to the reader's point of view, and I, and that by changing my point of view to my son's, it's a different readership, it's a different audience, and it seemed to come alive a little bit. The second little example I'm going to use is about attending class at Omega Institute. It was called Interspecies Communication. The group said that interspecies communication was a distractor and that my writing would be clear if I just used the phrase mind-to-mind connection. With a snake, Seraphina was 40 pounds, heavy, 10 feet long, and a python. So after I was introduced to Seraphina, the handler said that as Seraphina explored my hand with a forked tongue, that she helped people overcome their fears by interspecies communication, by mind-to-mind connection. How can you communicate with a snake who could squeeze you to death? There were some shaky moments that day, but that afternoon, I quelled my fears and I danced with the snake completely wrapped inside my shirt with just her belly showing. And finally, with the journey, writing nonfiction carries a risk of vulnerability. And I felt that. The group feedback was most helpful was to write this series by date. Put a little asterisk after each topic to delineate the end of one essay and the beginning of another. And that helped the essay, the journey, to flow more smoothly, although it really didn't. The best feedback I got was write my piece, read it back, read aloud to listen to my piece, put it away, and repeat the process. And I found, just as an overall, that the feedback has been so helpful. And thank you for listening to this part. And I'm going to pass this on to Persephone, who is a professional editor, which I especially appreciate. So Persephone Doliner, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm Persephone Doliner, called Seth mostly, and I'm an aspiring fiction writer. I've written a few essays that I like, and I've written and had published a few articles, not recently at all. Mostly, as Barbara noted, I'm a very long-term professional copy editor, and I actually really enjoy the chance I get to edit for people in this group. So thank you. And I also do still edit professionally, but not a lot. So I've been working on two fiction pieces. One is a long story, or perhaps it's a novella. I've gone through several drafts already. It's called Santa and the Dragon. And then I have a short story that I did one draft of and wasn't pleased with. And it is called Plaid. So I'm going to start with that, with not even the story itself, but an attempt at outlining the first scene that I submitted to the writers group. And they hadn't seen the story in a long time, some of the members. Anyway. Okay, so I decided, all right, I'm going to try to figure out where I'm going with this. I'm going to make an outline, which has not been my normal process. Here we go. This is only part of the outline for the first chapter. It's the first scene. I'm sorry, there's no chapters. This is the first scene. Okay. Characters. Eleanor and Evie are driving through flat countryside on the way to stay the night with a married couple, whom Eleanor knows from high school. Dialogue and conflict. The driver, Eleanor, explains that the visit developed from her 50th high school reunion. Another mutual classmate will also be there. Also, the hosts have said they have a horse who is in an event the next day. Eleanor says she is nervous about the visit, doesn't really know the hosts. Eleanor's description disquiets Evie, the narrator. She fears an awkward time. She came along with her friend just for fun. However, she does not say that she's feeling any disquiet. She comments on the landscape and sings Patti Smith's Horses. And Eleanor chimes in. Okay. And here are some of the comments. Quote, a good beginning consists of a hook or inciting incident that gets the reader interested. I don't think two women driving through the countryside is very gripping, but it does depend on their conversation. Re-examine conflict. A character's feelings of quiet or worry are not conflict. Well, that was a revelation to me. I had suspected that, but I realized that I had been pretty much my writing has kind of gone on the assumption that feelings of disquiet or worry are conflict. And this is ironic because I myself like quite a lot of activity in a story. So I'm re-examining conflict. And then another person noted on that same little presentation of the two women driving, a bit similar. For me, my process has always been finding the hook, the metaphorical doorway that opens into the tale. In simpler terms, the opening sentence. So I might start this story with one of these lines. The death of the friendship, slow and painful, occurred the weekend of Eleanor's 50th reunion. Or, I should have departed when it became evident that our hosts intended to use us as targets in their 50-year-long dart game. Or, when I last saw Eleanor, it was during a peculiar visit with a couple she'd known for 50 years. Well, I thought the middle one there was pure gold. There were actually some others. And I intend to adapt that to start with. And the revelation is, of course, the story is, and you guys don't know that, is about the host's little revenge drama. And you can't tell that at all from the original beginning. And then also with this, I realized that Eleanor and Evie's relationship was not really what the story was about. And I'm afraid Eleanor has now been combined into Evie. Now there's only Evie, first person narrator. And then another subsidiary thing, I realized, and I'd sort of known this all along, that having them sing Patti Smith's Horses is a bit random. There's the thing about the host's horse in the story, but somehow it's just not connected enough. So I'm going to work on that one. But having them break into Patti Smith may be one of those darlings that I have to kill. Okay, so that's that one. All right, and now here is another example of a revision. This is actually the first few paragraphs of chapter 2 of Santa and the Dragon. And to give you a tad of background, the first chapter is all about the dragon. But now he's off stage, and we're in Santa land. Here we go. Very near the top of the world, a motorcycle buzzed along a ridge, machine and rider limbed black against a piercingly blue polar twilight. The ridge dipped and widened, becoming a narrow band of scree, ringing the base of a mountain. The craggy giant was named Great Black Peak. It was one of a range, a cordillera, that ran almost the length of Ellesmere Island in Nunavut, Canada. The 10th largest island in the world, Ellesmere was about the size of Great Britain. There the resemblance ended. One of the most northerly places on Earth, right across the Nares Strait from Greenland's eastern shore, it was a land of Arctic desert terrain and extreme seasons, supporting little plant and animal life. Throughout history, few humans had lived on the great island. But early in the 20th century, international politics had prompted Canada to send a smattering of Inuit to eke out a life there, so that the country could claim the strategically sited island for its own. The motorcycle's rider was one of their descendants. Scarcely slowing as it reached the mountain, the motorbike sliced through a great crack in the rocky face. Blackness enveloped vehicle and rider. They sped a short distance along a path walled and roofed by rock and emerged into a cavern suffused with a greenish glow. Okay, so there you are, if you're still awake. The comments that it was just everybody, the consensus, too much information. Especially in it, they said maybe if it was a first chapter, but it's a second chapter. I pointed out, well, it's our first chapter with, in this scene, but still, I looked and said, oh my gosh, that is just too much information. And then another lesser comment was people noted, some people, that the motorcyclist would be in trouble if he didn't slow down going into this Black Mountain. Okay, so here is the revision of the paragraphs you heard before. Very near the top of the world, a motorcycle buzzed along a ridge, machine and rider limbed black against the piercingly blue polar twilight. The ridge dipped and widened, becoming a band of icy scree, ringing the base of a mountain. Slowing as it reached the scree, the bike disappeared into a gray gap in the mountain's jagged face. So, considerably shorter and I think punchier. Okay, and I want to continue just a little bit with what I call my special quirk that the group has surfaced for me. Both of those beginnings concern folks riding along, driving along. And people commented that in a lot of my writing, I seem to be navigating a map, kind of tracing movements, describing every twist and turn that a character takes. And realized that that is kind of true. I've minutely described how people move through space. This is probably because I get lost all the time myself. So I'm concerned that my characters, if I don't give them explicit directions, will do the same. So I'm working on that. Mainly, I'm observing and reading other writers how people get characters from point A to point B without pointing out every little twist and turn. Okay, and my next thing will not start with somebody driving. All right, that is it for me, and I would now like to introduce the legendary Kathy Morris.
Well, hi there. Thank you, Seth. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. And I hope that my rural internet will hold up for the rest of the panel here. But if it doesn't, I'll be right back. So before I get into some specifics about the group's critique process, I want to mention a few ways that being in a writer's group have helped with my current project. Although I'm primarily a visual artist, I also have a lot of writing experience, mostly feature stories for newspapers. I've combined my art with words in the past, and some of you might be familiar with this book that I did, a visual book, as you can see. This was created with the help of a grant from Lightwork, which is an arts organization in Syracuse, New York. In recent years, my goal has been to create a more extensive visual book that integrates my life story with my collage art. Until Judith extended an invitation to me last July to join this group, this project was mostly talk and very little action. For me, one of the most important benefits of this group is a deadline. The need to submit something twice a month for critique has nudged me past a lot of my pondering and mulling and equivocation, circling around that seemed to characterize my working method or lack thereof. I had doubts about the quality of my writing and confusion about the structure of the book. I questioned whether my experiences would speak to a larger audience and what kind of audience. It turns out, probably no surprise to most of you, that the way to address all this doubt, confusion, and questioning is through the actual process of sitting my butt down at the computer, doing the necessary research, writing and revising lots of rough drafts, and getting feedback as I go. Even though as a collage artist, I've always been completely at ease with a hands-on improvisational relationship to subject matter, it's taken me quite a while to accept the same figure it out as you go, cut and paste reality about my writing process. Through the often awkward and vulnerable process of sharing the work in critique, I'm coming to believe in my skills and ideas, and that my words do reach other people. I'm starting to get a better sense of what is unclear in my narrative, what needs more or better explanation, and how to more successfully bring people into my world. Okay, so with that background, what is taking shape in my work so far is an autobiographical account of the psychological, social, and instructional forces that inform my artwork. The written work is evolving as a series of chapters woven together with certain thematic threads and visual materials. I'm picturing the text followed by a layout of the collages organized along the same themes as the text. Illustrate the text, and the text isn't trying to interpret the art. It's my intention that the two forms will coexist on an equal basis, so that the collages retain their innate mystery and the stories stand on their own. Now, I'll read from page 1 of a first draft of a 5-page chapter that was submitted to the group this past December. And just so you know the context, this chapter followed on the heels of an account of my experience as a member of the feminist art studio in Ithaca in the 1970s. The chapter starts with a definition of the term Gestalt, as quoted from the website of the Gestalt Counseling and Training Institute of Ann Arbor. Gestalt, a configuration so unified as a whole that its properties cannot be derived from a simple summation of its parts. During this same time period, early to mid-1970s, my experiences in the feminist art studio's consciousness-raising circles found their counterpart in a women's Gestalt therapy group I attended weekly. Facilitated by Ithaca's own, now legendary, Sarah Pines, this group of 5 women, all of us in our 20s, Caucasian and from mostly middle-class backgrounds, met in Sarah's comfortable living room in her house on State Street, conveniently located just around the corner from my Giles Street hobbit hole. And hobbit hole was a reference to a description of the house in a previous chapter. Sarah herself was trained in the Gestalt therapy methods developed by Fritz and Laura Perls and introduced in the 1940s as an alternative to more traditional psychoanalysis. Nurturing and intuitive, Sarah was a diminutive, quietly formidable presence. She guarded and guided us as each woman, in turn, found herself, according to her inner dictates, shifting place on the 3 cushions set out in the center of our circle. Each of these cushions represented one corner of the rescuer, victim, persecutor triangle that was one of the hallmarks of the Perls approach. There was also an objective observer position that allowed us to step back and see ourselves with greater wisdom and perspective. Tears were a given. So that was the first page of the chapter. Some of the comments I received included, "Well said of Sarah," and a suggestion to change Ithaca's own, now legendary Sarah Pines to Ithaca's own, now renowned Sarah Pines, because legendary, quote, implies passed away, I think, unquote. There were lots of rewrites suggested for the Gestalt cushion scenario. Here are a couple of them. In Gestalt, you access 3 parts of yourself and sit on one of 3 cushions to feel and show which part. Another of the rewrites, the suggestions, was, according to her inner dictates, the woman in the center shifted from cushion to cushion, from identity to identity. The basic confusion seemed to center around what we actually did on those cushions. So as part of my revision, for one thing, I actually added a more specific title as the terms of how the chapter evolved. And that title was Circles, Safety, Symbolism, and the Gestalt. And I also added another quotation. The second quote was an excerpt from an interview with the legendary Ithaca painter Gillian Pedersen Craig, where Gillian referenced, and this is the quote, "a feeling that we all have a kind of nostalgia for, the notion that life is somehow meaningful, and that while we are indeed separate, we continually seek out ways of discovering situations which will allow us to feel part of a larger whole." In the response to the second draft, the general consensus seemed to be that this additional quote was helpful. I incorporated many of the group's edits and expanded the text accordingly, so that the description of the Gestalt process now read as follows. She guarded and guided us as each woman, in turn, sat in the center of our circle, where 3 cushions were set out. Each of these cushions represented one corner of the rescuer-victim-persecutor triangle that is one of the hallmarks of the Pearls approach. According to her inner dictates and Sarah's carefully timed questions, the woman in the center of the circle shifted roles as she moved from cushion to cushion, from corner to corner of the triangle. There was also an objective observer position that allowed us to step back and see ourselves with greater wisdom and perspective. And tears were given. The general consensus from the group was that the revision was much clearer and easier to follow, except there were objections to that last part about the objective observer. People wanted to know, is this person also on a cushion inside the center of the circle, one of the wider circle? So at that point, I was eager to move on to the next chapter. And I didn't address these final questions in my writing. It was only while revisiting the group's comments in the process of preparing for this panel that more details about the objective observer bubbled up from 50 years ago. I remembered that when we finally took on the role of the objective observer, we got off the cushions. Each of us, and sat on a chair. And it was from the embodied clarity of that vantage point on the chair that we could begin to sort out the dynamics of the rescuer-victim-persecutor triangle and arrive at a place of more integration and harmony. And now that I think about it, that whole Gestalt process actually has a lot in common with the act of writing. So thank you so much for listening and being here. I hope that was helpful, and I'm looking forward to more discussion with you.
Do we go over to you, Judith, now? Do you want to start a question and answer session? You're on mute.
Robin seems to have wandered off, so Robin is, excuse me, moderating all of these and herding a lot of cats. So yes, does anyone have questions? Or as my friend Susanna Berryman used to say when we were teaching together, questions, comments, jokes? So anybody have questions? There's one. Okay, and you're muted, Pat.
Right, okay.
There you go. Oh, you're
Oh, you went back.
I'm not muted now. Am I? Am I muted now?
Yeah,
there
we
you
can
are.
hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Full disclosure, I've known Seth Doliner for about 150 years, right, Seth? We were roommates in San Francisco.
Wow.
Yeah, in the 80s, early 80s. So maybe even late 70s. Anyway, so I have a question for Seth, and you don't have to answer right now, darling, but who's your audience for the Santa and the Dragon? Because it sounds from the title like a kid's book, and yet the vocabulary was not, and the rhythm was not kid's book sounding to me. I don't know. That's all my question. It sounds like a very fascinating book. I'd love to read the story. I'd love to read the story when it's done. That's all I wanted. Just, you have to keep in mind who you want this, who your audience is all the time, is my opinion. I'm also a writer. I have 2 books on Amazon, self-published, fantasies with dragons. So yes, the dragons in my books are the good guys.
Don't forget to take yourself off mute.
Right. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
No,
That's it.
I thought Persephone was talking, but she's on.
Oh, Oh, I'm not
And I
sure.
will now. Yes. I do want to answer just a little. Yes, I know, Pat.
Hi, darling.
I'm not being very strategic about any of this. I just like them. And I also, if I had to take, it's not intended for children. I
Okay.
know that. I do, and I mean, it's not clearly not written for children. And it has some serious themes, mainly the Inuit stuff. I mean, what was done to those people?
I know.
It's an unknown, little known story. And just because it's about Santa and a mythological creature, no. So the intended audience is the child in all of us. There we go.
Okay.
The child in all of us.
I would think seriously about using the word Santa in your title then.
Santa, yes. Yeah.
But about not using it maybe because
Oh, not using it. Oh, not using it. I
I
see.
mean, I know
Okay.
you want to, but and I don't know. I haven't read
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It was originally an incident at the North Pole. And or that was one but I don't like that either. Okay, to be continued. Thanks for the comment.
Anybody
Yeah.
who wants advice on how to get a wonderful book cover made for ebook and print, both, for $35. There's a Ukrainian company called getcovers.com. Write it down.
Okay.
I've had one cover here. Can't really see it, can you?
Oh, there go. Well,
No, you can't really see it.
There we
Wait,
are. Yeah.
oh,
I see dragon wings.
yeah, there's a
Yes.
black dragon and then it's a fantasy and I don't want to take up too much time. Very quickly, I'll talk fast. They have relationships with Shutterstock and something called deposit photos, so you don't even have to pay for the photos or whatever you're using on the cover necessarily. They also have portfolios of book covers you can have. Anyway, they're a Ukrainian company, so that's another reason.
Getcovers.com.
Getcovers.com. Yep. And I've had a lot of experience with Amazon advertising thing, and I know the right gurus to listen to and the ones not to. And so if anybody wants any of that information, Steph, just let me know and I'll give you as concise an answer as I can. Okay. All right. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Christina,
Can you-
unmute yourself. There you
Hi,
go.
everyone. Thank you for sharing your work. I'm curious for comments on how how you feel like commenting across different genres. So it sounds like a number of you have a lot of experience as editors, in your professional lives. I come from a science background, so I'm curious when you're working in a critique circle, whether you find it difficult to work across very varied genres in terms of providing feedback that is obviously you can provide feedback in terms of how you interpret the work, but if you find it difficult to comment across genres, I guess is the most.
I'd like to comment on that if I may, because I'm the only nonfiction writer, and I have all these wonderful stories that are coming through, and I'm just absolutely charmed by them. And sometimes they trigger things that I want to write about, but I don't find that difficult at all. And I'm not a fantasy writer before this, not at all, not at all. But the stories that they weave and the character development is just so superbly done.
I will add that for people who aren't fantasy writers or readers, I think it is a learning curve. Because sometimes I think I'm being perfectly clear and I'm not, and sometimes it has something to do with the genre. But we're all learning each other's genres, which I really like.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It's taken me, I would say it's taken me, the good part of a year to get a sense of the screenwriting format, and then some of the aspects of the fantasy genre. So I would totally agree with Judith that it's a curve. And there were some things that, like sometimes I would make comments that just weren't, they were just based on I didn't understand something. Like I would want some more written description of a character's facial expression or movement or location or something like that. And sometimes somebody would say something, oh, well, that's the actor's job, or that's the director's job, or or like Judith said, that's on the other hand, the other side of that is that she had to learn, get used to the idea that she didn't have a stage manager.
And Kathy is the one who always points it out, and I really appreciate that.
Well, for me as a visual artist, I need to see things. I need a writer to describe something. So that so we would bring. So we're also bringing who we are in that regard to our critiquing process.
You do know the law of writing, though. Show, don't tell. You all know that?
Yeah.
That's the first rule of writing.
But it's very tricky because there's a certain amount of telling you have to do, especially in fantasy. And how you get the showing in, and then the telling, and then the showing, and then the telling, and then enough showing.
It's for sure. That's for sure.
I'll let you know when I figure it out.
I recently wrote, I'm coming to the end of the third book, and I wrote paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph about this woman telling about her background, and all of a sudden I thought, this is so boring. I'm just going to make her into a part of the desert. She is of the desert. So then I got rid of all that nonsense. Kill your darlings. Okay. I'm done again.
Other questions?
Are we done today?
No more questions? Oh, there we go.
I just want to say that really appreciate how you went through the process with the beginning and then getting feedback and then actually rewriting. And I just thought it was really interesting that you kept with specific areas of your work so that you could kind of figure out how to make it work better. And then my guess is that as you go along, those things that you've learned there will carry over to the next part of your writing. So it's just an observation, and I thought that was really interesting to do it that way.
Thanks.
Oh, Barbara, how is it different from, because you've been in a writers group for a long time, right?
Right. Well, I'm in a couple writers groups. The first one the one I've been in for the longest time, we have a prompt. I mean, you don't have to write to the prompt. Everybody does different kinds of work, from fiction to poetry to just sort of memoir kind of writing. And after somebody reads, we'll give some feedback. A lot of it is encouragement, of course, but like pointing out where things really worked or if we were missing something. So that, but it's I mean, it's a bigger group. It's about 10 people. So not everybody meets all the time, and we meet weekly. And it's been, I don't know, maybe 15 years. It's a long time. The other group is a novel group, and we submit part of our novel once a month. I mean, we meet twice a month, but once a month, and everybody gives feedback about what works and also where they find trouble spots or they didn't understand. So very similar to what you do. And only occasionally does people come back with a different version. I think partly because we're trying to move on to get the novel finished, and then we would be do the editing. I mean, I've actually done some editing from what I've heard, but mostly I put that aside and I think about how, when I'm writing, how I can use that in what I'm writing. And we've only been meeting for about a year. We were in a class together, and we were people who just really liked each other's writing and very different genres. So I'll see how we evolve. There's only 5 of us, and it's very exciting.
I'm wondering how many other people who are here today are actually in a writers group. I don't know, show of hands.
Yeah. I was going to say one other thing is that I have to be really careful how much I spend with feedback because of other people, even though I love doing it, because it sort of gets in the way of my own writing. I don't know if anybody has that issue, but I really have to work hard to do both. Yeah, it's all.
There is a certain feeling of sort of stubbornness and triumph when you say, no, I'm going to do it the way I did. I don't care what
Right.
say. Like, I chose legendary, not renowned.
Right.
So
Yeah, that is interesting. In putting this together, I was looking at stuff, and every once in a while it's like, I don't care what they said, I'm leaving it this way. Exactly what Kathy said.
Well, it's also the idea that if somebody gives you an example of what they think is good, I don't always think that's the best feedback, because it doesn't give me the opportunity to figure out how to work in a particular area. So it's sort of mixed when I get that kind of feedback, although mostly we don't do that, where we give examples of what we think it should be.
Well, it's such a question of voice.
Right.
It might be brilliant writing, but it might not be my voice. So I'm sorry, I missed who else was in a writers group. I think Susan
is.
And Sarah, did you raise your hand? You're in a writers group.
No,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, interested though.
Oh, okay.
But I work in academia, so I like the positive feedback aspect. I always try to give students like positive feedback, because it can be so unrelentingly negative and critical. So yeah.
I see a hand up, Carol. You'll need to unmute. There you go. Oh, nope, you're muted still. There we go.
I've written a lot of books in academia, but for ever since the beginning of COVID, I got the idea that I would like to really write in a more creative way. And so I wrote a kind of a memoir, which I've now put on Substack, or I am putting on Substack. But what I think would be really nice in terms of if there were a writers group to join, would be getting the kind of critique that pulls my writing away from the academic type writing into more creative and readable writing. I mean, I try, but I think I would really benefit if people like you guys were critiquing what I had to write or what I've written.
Yeah, and we will talk, Carol. I know that when we put this together, we were thinking maybe some people would want to join. So we'll talk amongst ourselves and see what we think.
It seems like the way you have it organized, it would be, you don't want to get it much bigger than it is, I wouldn't think.
That was our question, because we really like being able to kind of brainstorm about writing. So we'll see what we think. But thank you for your interest. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Not everybody submits every time. So we don't necessarily have 6 pieces of writing to read at every meeting. I mean, it just varies.
Yeah.
Life interferes.
I'd like to make a quick comment on that, on the time, because one of the things that we're sharing with people today is what we're doing now that we're finding very, very helpful. The feedback that we have time to, when it was a larger group, and Felicia has been heading this for a long, long time. When it was a larger group, there wasn't enough time to really do what we're doing now. Everybody, we have 9 people, then we divide our time 9 ways and whatever gets done. But it didn't allow the flexibility that we have now, which I find very, very helpful.
Can I comment on back to the topic that was just mentioned about not taking comments or not changing your writing based on comments given, and using the Santa and the dragon example? Like actually the detailed first draft really spoke to me. I liked that level of detail. And I read a lot of fantasy books with my son. Like, he reads some extras, but we read some together. And I definitely feel like there's an audience, if maybe a historic fiction genre where, people who are quite interested in learning, but are still wanting to read a story as opposed to a complete nonfiction version of the same information. So, so with that in mind, how do you balance keeping your own voice, and maybe if you know who your audience is, versus taking in the critique that you may get, so details, I've certainly read some fantasy novels where it's too detailed for me as well, or, I just kind of want to skip some of the details versus enjoying them. So it feels like there are definitely different audiences out there.
Well, I think it's really the tricky show, don't tell, tell, don't show, because especially in fantasy, you're creating a world. So there's a lot more telling because it isn't the world that everybody knows. You can't just say, I got in my car and drove to the store, because there might not be cars and there might not be stores, and somehow all of that has to be made clear. And I don't know why we write this.
Well, I can speak to that a little. One of my great pleasures with that story has been creating the Santaverse. I mean, the location is the location, and I am a little anxious about that because I've never been that far north. I've just read everything I can find about up there, but I haven't actually been there. But when it comes to Santa, you have the issues that Santa comes loaded with, we all know about Santa, right? We know he delivers all these toys all in one night. Well, I now understand how he does it, and I plan to share that. And I've worked, but you have this given set, so there is a lot of explanation. I remember once one that I didn't present to you. I presented the group with a whole page which had a lot of detail about how the magic worked in Santa's workshop, as I see it. And well, jaws gaped. I mean, it just got very abstract. So it is definitely a challenge, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's really very, very, I really enjoy visiting that universe and in my own head.
So
And I'm not a big fantasy reader either. I'm more a traditional science fiction reader and literary women's fiction. Don't really like fantasy. So there we go.
So we're coming up on 3:15. And I have to get ready for another Zoom session. But Judith Pratt has her email in the chat. It's basically judith.pratt.writer@gmail.com. But I also wanted to mention that the Community Arts Partnership has grants. We've already done the 2024 grant cycle, but in 2025, we have one grant called SOS. It's Strategic Opportunity Stipend. It has helped writers. Writers have used that grant to attend conferences that are really, the opportunity has to be something where there's information about how it will boost your career to the next level. So it can't just be, I'd love to attend a conference. It has to be, I need to meet these people. I need to make these connections. It could also help with self-publishing costs. And it's all on our website, which is artspartner.org, artspartner.org. If you can't remember that, it's on the Spring Rights website under host. We also have other grants. We have grants for public activities such as readings. Public readings has to be open to the general public. And we have an artist and community grant, which is for an artist to create new work, but somehow involve a community of their choosing in the creation of that work. And then we have an arts education grant, which is basically going into the schools for sequential learning. And we did, now the next opportunities for this are in February of 2025. So there's that. And I urge you to look at springrights.org to see what else is coming up. As I said, there are more Zoom stuff happening even today. And then there's workshops through August. And I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to stop the recording. And if anyone has any other questions, then I'll stay on a little bit.